Hey yo, what is going on everyone? It is your boy El Chapo, also known as KurrentJoker, as you can see by that intro, otherwise known as Ya Boi. Now, in our last video, or maybe no, not the last video, 2 videos ago, we talked about the Witch's Bridge out in Grand Island, Nebraska. Well, with Halloween coming up pretty soon, witches are pretty popular. Thinking about the witch being burned at the stake from Nebraska, and just kind of having that kind of stuff in my mind, I was thinking, what better video to do today than just talk about the history of witch hunts, of witches, the burning at the stake. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I hope you guys are ready. Let's get right into it. Here we go. I always say that there is no better place to start than the beginning. Well, with witches, it's extremely hard to start at the beginning. And that's just because, it's extremely difficult to pinpoint their first reference or when they were first being recorded in human history. However, there is a major belief of when this was. It's actually in the Bible, more specifically the book of 1 Samuel. And it was believed that this book was written between 931 BC and 721 BC. Anyways, it tells the story of King Saul, who sought out the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help him defeat the Philistine army. Now, the witch roused Samuel, who then prophesied the death of Saul and his sons. The next day, according to the Bible, Saul's sons died in battle, and because of that, Saul committed suicide. This isn't the only time that witches are referenced in the Bible. There's other Old Testament verses that condemn witches, such as the oft-cited Exodus 22:18, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And then there are other additional biblical passages that caution against divination, chanting, or using witches to contact the dead. The infamous witch hunts. We've all read about them. We all love to talk about them. However, many of us believe that witch hunts became famous with the infamous Salem witch trials. But that isn't the case. They did not become popular because of that witch trial. As a matter of fact, they didn't even become popular in America or the colonies. They were actually started in Europe back in the mid-1400s, when many women who were accused of being witches, well, they decided to confess. They only confessed, though, because they were under torture. And back then, that didn't matter. All that mattered was that a confession was made. And, well, these women confessed to a variety of wicked behaviors. Within a century or so, witch hunts were common, and most of the accused were executed by burning at the stake or even hanging. Single women, widows, and other women on the margins of society were the ones who were especially targeted. It's honestly just crazy to think about how many women were killed during the peak of the witch hunts. Between the years 1500 and 1660, it's suspected that up to 80,000 quote-unquote witches were put to death in Europe. And around 80% of them were women thought to be in cahoots with the devil and to be filled with lust. And Germany actually had the highest witchcraft execution rate. Meanwhile, Ireland was the lowest. It's pretty interesting, actually. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to pronounce this. However, I will put it on screen because I already know I'm going to butcher the crud out of it. But it's a publication called the Malleus Maleficarum. I think that's how it's pronounced. Was written by two well-respected German Dominicans in 1486. Now, this likely spurred witch mania to go viral. The book, usually translated as The Hammer of Witches, was essentially a guide on how to identify, hunt, and interrogate witches. Malleus Maleficarum labeled witchcraft as heresy and quickly became the authority for Protestants and Catholics trying to flush out witches living among them. For more than 100 years, the book sold more copies than any other book in Europe except for the Bible. Unfortunately, as witch mania was decreasing out in Europe, it was growing in popularity out here in the New World. And that leads us to the most famous witch hunt of all time, the one I mentioned earlier, the Salem witch trials. Okay, so if you haven't read The Crucible, I first of all definitely recommend it because it is my favorite piece of literature probably ever. I love The Crucible. I loved it in acting class. I loved it in English class. I just love The Crucible. But we're not here to talk about what I like. We're here to talk about witches. So, if you haven't read The Crucible, let me give you a little bit of a background. If you've read The Crucible, though, you'll definitely recognize some of these names, and it could be fun to talk about for a little bit. So, the Salem witch trials began when 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams began suffering from fits, body contortions, and uncontrolled screaming. Today is actually believed that they were just poisoned by some kind of a fungus out in the forest, which caused these spasms and delusions. As more young women began to exhibit these symptoms, mass hysteria ensued, and 3 women were accused of witchcraft: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, an enslaved woman who was owned by Paris's father. Tituba confessed to being a witch and began accusing others of using black magic. On June 10th, Bridget Bishop became the first accused witch to be put to death during the Salem witch trials, when she was hanged at the Salem gallows. Ultimately, around 150 people were accused during this time, and 18 of them were put to death. And women weren't even the only victims of the Salem witch trials. There were 6 men who were also convicted and put to death. However, Salem wasn't even the first incident of a witch hunt in the New World. Connecticut actually was. In Windsor, Connecticut, around 1647, Ailes Young was the first person in America executed for witchcraft. Before Connecticut's final witch trial took place around 1697, 46 people were accused of witchcraft and 11 of them were put to death for the crime. Then, in Virginia, people were less frantic about witches. In fact, in lower Norfolk County in 1655, a law was passed making it a crime to falsely accuse someone of witchcraft. Still, witchcraft was a concern. About 24 witch trials, mostly of women, took place in Virginia between 1626 and 1730. None of the accused, though, were actually executed. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, oh yeah, but there's no such thing as witches. Witches do not actually exist, right? Well, don't get too far ahead of yourself there, because there actually are technically modern day witches. They don't usually go by the term witch, though, because they've been trying super hard to shake the stereotypes from the past and even the contemporary stereotypes of witches for the longest time. And these people are called Wiccans, and that is from their religion that they follow, which is an official religion in both the United States and Canada, called Wicca. And Wiccans avoid evil and the appearance of evil at all costs. Their motto is to harm none, and they strive to live a peaceful, tolerant, and balanced life in tune with nature and humanity. Many modern-day witches still perform witchcraft, but there's seldom anything sinister about it. Their spells and incantations are often derived from their Book of Shadows, which is a 20th century collection of wisdom and witchcraft, and can be compared to the act of prayer in other religions. A modern-day witchcraft potion, for example, is more likely to be an herbal remedy for the flu instead of a hex to harm somebody. Today's witchcraft spells also are actually usually used to stop people from doing evil things or from harming themselves. So ironically, while it's probable that some historical witches used witchcraft for evil purposes, many may have embraced it for healing or protection against the immortality they were accused of. But witches, whether actual or accused, still face persecution and death. Several men and women suspected of doing witchcraft have been beaten and killed in New Guinea since 2010, including a young mother who was burned alive Similar episodes of violence against people accused of being witches have occurred in Africa, South America, the Middle East, and immigrant communities in Europe and the United States. Oh, and I actually almost forgot, because I did mention I was going to talk about the burning of the stake. Saint Alban was one of the first notable people to be burned at the stake, and that took place around 304 AD. The practice then enjoyed a long period of fervent approval as a method for dealing with heretics and witches and other sorts of people. So that's basically how they got started. It just took place a long time ago, and people thought it was the best way to take care of these people. And so there you go. That is actually the history of witches and witchcraft and how it all kind of got started. And then you can kind of do some research on your own. I am a great advocate for people doing research and learning new things, because I enjoy learning new things all the time, and I think everyone should try to always learn some new things. So go out, do some research, try and find a way to figure out how older witches back in history got turned into the stereotypical witches that we see now on TV. With that being said, it's your boy El Chapo. Thank you for watching today's video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Talk to you later. Peace.